Back off, old black man. This memorial isn't a tourist attraction for people looking for sympathy. Officer Brandon Cole sneered as he ripped the bouquet of white lilies from Isaiah Whitaker's trembling hands and hurled it onto the granite steps. Before the 73-year-old African-American man could react, Brandon slammed both hands into his chest, sending him crashing against the fallen officer's memorial. Isaiah's worn wooden keepsake box burst open across the pavement, scattering a faded police badge, a folded American flag, and several weathered photographs. Brandon looked down with a mocking grin. Heroes earned the right to stand here. You? You're just another old black man trying to steal their moment. The crowd fell into uneasy silence. Isaiah slowly reached for the folded flag, but Brandon kicked it several feet away. Don't touch that flag. Men like you don't deserve to lay a finger on what real officers died protecting. Several people gasped. Others quietly lifted their phones to record. Isaiah never argued. He simply looked toward one engraved name on the memorial wall, his eyes heavy with a grief that seemed older than the stone itself. At that moment, a convoy of police command vehicles rolled into the plaza. Charlotte's newly appointed police captain stepped out, froze the instant he saw the elderly black man sitting on the cold granite, and suddenly sprinted toward him. Before you see why the captain ran instead of speaking, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. If you believe no one should ever be judged by appearance, share your thoughts below, subscribe to the channel, and stay until the end, because the next few minutes will change everything these witnesses thought they knew. Just 24 hours earlier, before anyone had pointed a camera at him or questioned his right to stand before the memorial, Isaiah Whitaker woke before sunrise in the small brick house where he had lived alone for nearly 18 years. The house sat on a quiet street on Charlotte's west side, its white paint fading beneath the Carolina sun. Nothing about it hinted that the man inside had once worn a police uniform for nearly 3 decades. Isaiah moved slowly through his morning routine. At 73, every step reminded him of old injuries that never truly healed. A bullet wound in his left shoulder ached whenever rain approached. His right knee stiffened each morning from years of chasing suspects through alleyways and abandoned buildings. Still, he never complained. He had learned long ago that pain was simply another form of memory. After brewing a cup of black coffee, he opened an old cedar cabinet in the corner of the living room. Inside rested a carefully polished wooden box. He lifted it with both hands as gently as someone holding a sleeping child. Every item inside had remained untouched except for one day each year. The first was an old police badge whose silver finish had faded with time. Beside it rested a folded American flag presented at a funeral decades earlier. There were several photographs, each carrying pieces of a life that no newspaper had ever fully told. One showed 2 young officers standing shoulder to shoulder in front of Patrol Unit 12, laughing after finishing their academy training. Isaiah smiled. Standing beside him in the photograph was Officer Thomas Monroe, his best friend, his partner, his brother in every way except blood. They had entered the Charlotte Police Department only 6 months apart. Thomas had been fearless. Isaiah had been patient. Together they became the officers younger recruits wanted to emulate. Thomas always joked that Isaiah talked criminals into surrendering before anyone had to reach for a weapon. Isaiah often replied that Thomas ran so fast he frightened criminals into giving up anyway. Those memories still made him laugh. For a moment, then his smile slowly disappeared. His eyes settled on another photograph. It showed Thomas sitting on the front porch of a small house, holding a little boy no older than 6. The child's bright smile filled nearly half the picture. Isaiah gently brushed a thumb across the tiny face. "You're all grown up now," he whispered softly. He carefully returned the photograph before reaching for the final item in the box. A sealed envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. Across the front, written in neat handwriting, were only 7 words. "To my son, when the time is right." Isaiah stared at the envelope for several seconds. He had been carrying it for 27 years. He had promised never to open it, not unless the day finally came. He closed the box. Today, he thought, was only another memorial, nothing more. Outside, the city slowly awakened. Church bells echoed across the neighborhood. Flags hung at half-staff throughout Charlotte as families prepared to honor officers who had never returned home. Isaiah walked into his bedroom and opened the closet. Most of his clothes were simple. Work shirts, old sweaters, comfortable jackets. Hidden in the very back hung one dark navy suit. He removed it carefully. The fabric had become slightly loose over the years, but he kept it perfectly pressed. Pinned inside the jacket pocket was a tiny ribbon representing years of honorable service. He never wore his medals. He believed medals belonged in museums. Promises belonged in people's hearts. After dressing, Isaiah stood before a mirror. Gray hair framed a face marked by decades of sacrifice. Deep lines surrounded calm brown eyes that had seen violence, loss, courage, and forgiveness. He adjusted his tie twice before quietly nodding to himself. "You'd better not laugh at this old suit, Thomas," he murmured with a faint smile. "You always said I couldn't match a tie." The empty room answered only with silence. Before leaving, Isaiah picked up fresh white lilies from the kitchen table, Thomas's favorite flowers. Every year they had argued about them. Thomas insisted roses looked stronger. Isaiah insisted lilies carried peace. Neither ever changed the other's mind. Isaiah smiled at the memory as he locked the front door. He never noticed the young neighbor watching from across the street. Mrs. Evelyn Harper, an 80-year-old widow, waved from her porch. "Going to see your old partner again?" Isaiah tipped his head respectfully. "Like I promised." She smiled warmly. "He'd be proud of you." Isaiah paused. "No," he answered quietly. "I've spent my life trying to be worthy of him." With that, he climbed into his aging pickup truck. Its faded blue paint had long since lost its shine. The engine rumbled before finally starting. On the passenger seat rested only the bouquet of lilies and the wooden keepsake box. Nothing expensive, nothing impressive, just memories. As Isaiah drove toward downtown Charlotte, police motorcycles occasionally passed in preparation for the annual Fallen Officers Memorial Ceremony. He watched them disappear into the distance. A gentle smile crossed his face. The uniform had changed. The patrol cars looked newer, the radios sounded different, but the badge still carried the same promise. To protect strangers, to serve with honor, to come home if you could, and if you couldn't, to never be forgotten. Isaiah had no idea that before the morning was over, the city he had quietly served for nearly 30 years would forget exactly who he was. Nor could he imagine that one young officer's arrogance was about to uncover a truth buried for almost 3 decades. As his truck disappeared into the morning traffic, the first television helicopters began circling above the Memorial Plaza, preparing to broadcast a ceremony that no one would ever forget for the reason they expected. By the time Isaiah Whitaker reached Memorial Plaza, the entire downtown district had already transformed into a sea of blue uniforms and American flags. Police motorcycles lined the entrance. Honor guards stood perfectly still beneath the bright Carolina sun. Families of fallen officers quietly filled the front rows, many carrying framed photographs of loved ones who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Television crews adjusted their cameras while reporters rehearsed solemn introductions for the morning broadcast. Isaiah parked several blocks away. He preferred walking. It gave him a few extra minutes to prepare himself. Holding the bouquet of white lilies in one hand and the old wooden keepsake box in the other, he slowly made his way toward the memorial. Every step carried another memory. He could almost hear Thomas Monroe laughing beside him. "You're getting slower every year, old man." Isaiah smiled to himself. "And you're still impatient." The imaginary conversation faded as he reached the security checkpoint. A young volunteer smiled politely. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning. Family member?" Isaiah hesitated. The answer had never been simple. "Something like that." The volunteer nodded without asking another question and motioned him through. For a moment, Isaiah believed the morning would unfold exactly as it had every year before. He was wrong. Near the center of the plaza, Officer Brandon Cole stood watching the arriving guests. Only 6 months into his career, Brandon had already built a reputation for being aggressive. His supervisors called it confidence. Older officers quietly called it arrogance. Freshly pressed dress blues stretched neatly across his athletic frame. His polished boots reflected the sunlight. Everything about his appearance suggested discipline. Everything except the way he judged people before speaking to them. As Isaiah approached the memorial, Brandon noticed him immediately. An elderly black man. A faded navy suit. Scuffed dress shoes. An old wooden box. Brandon's eyes narrowed. He stepped directly into Isaiah's path. "Sir." Isaiah stopped. "Morning, officer. Invitation." Isaiah blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Your invitation. I've never needed one before." Brandon folded his arms. "Well, today you do." Isaiah looked around. Other guests continued entering without anyone asking for invitation. Several men in expensive suits walked straight past security. A retired officer wearing civilian clothes nodded to Brandon and was waved through without a word. Isaiah noticed. So did a few people nearby. "I come every year," Isaiah said calmly. "I just want to leave these flowers." Brandon glanced at the lilies. They're not accepting public donations today. They're not donations. They're for someone. Who? Isaiah looked toward the memorial wall. A friend. Brandon gave a sarcastic laugh. Everybody says that. Isaiah remained silent. Years in law enforcement had taught him that anger rarely solved anything. Patience often did. I won't be long. I said no. Several nearby conversations slowed. People began looking toward the growing exchange. Isaiah took one careful step forward. Brandon immediately blocked him again. Didn't you hear me? I did. Then why are you still standing here? Because promises don't expire. Brandon's expression hardened. You people always think rules don't apply to you. The words hung in the air. A middle-aged woman standing nearby looked up sharply. Another retired officer frowned but said nothing. Isaiah's face never changed. His voice remained gentle. I've spent most of my life respecting rules. Brandon smirked. Really? He looked Isaiah up and down. Judging by that suit, I'd say you've spent most of your life asking other people for favors. Several people shifted uncomfortably. One television cameraman quietly turned his lens toward them. Isaiah lowered his eyes briefly, not because he felt ashamed, because he was remembering another young officer many years earlier, one who had once made the same mistake of judging too quickly. Thomas had corrected that rookie with kindness instead of anger. Isaiah decided to do the same. I'm not here to cause trouble, son. Brandon immediately snapped. I'm not your son. His voice echoed across the entrance. And don't call me son like we're equals. Isaiah nodded softly. My mistake. You should have made fewer mistakes before showing up here. Brandon reached toward the wooden keepsake box. What's inside? Personal belongings. I'm going to inspect them. They're fragile. I wasn't asking permission. Before Isaiah could respond, Brandon pulled the box from his hands. Isaiah instinctively reached forward. Please, be careful. Brandon noticed the urgency in his voice. Instead of handing the box back, he held it farther away. What? You hiding something? No. Then relax. Isaiah's heartbeat quickened, not because he feared the inspection, because some memories deserved gentle hands. Sergeant Denise Carter had been greeting guests several yards away when she noticed the confrontation. She immediately recognized Brandon. She sighed quietly. What is he doing now? She started walking toward them. Meanwhile, Brandon continued examining the outside of the worn wooden box. This thing belongs in a museum, Isaiah answered quietly. In some ways. It does. Brandon laughed. I've seen better-looking boxes at yard sales. Several younger officers chuckled nervously. None of them knew why Isaiah refused to take his eyes off the keepsake. Denise came within earshot. Officer Cole. Brandon looked over. I've got it under control, Sergeant. Denise studied Isaiah for only a second. Something about the elderly man's calm posture felt strangely familiar. Then she noticed a corner of an old silver badge barely visible inside the partially opened box. Her expression changed. She stepped closer. Sir. Before she could finish, Brandon interrupted. I'm checking his belongings. Denise lowered her voice. Let me handle this. Brandon shook his head. He's refusing to cooperate. Isaiah quietly answered. I haven't refused anything. Denise looked directly into Isaiah's eyes. There was dignity there. Not fear, not deception, just decades of quiet sorrow. She was about to ask his name. Then loud applause erupted across the plaza. The ceremony announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, the official procession has now entered the downtown district. Every officer instinctively turned toward the approaching motorcade. Brandon seized the moment. He grabbed Isaiah's arm firmly. You'll stay right here until I decide whether you belong. Isaiah looked once more toward the memorial, only a few yards away. So close that he could read Thomas Monroe's name engraved into the black granite. Yet farther away than it had ever felt. And before anyone realized how quickly the situation was about to spiral out of control, Brandon tightened his grip and took one deliberate step forward. Officer Brandon Cole tightened his grip around Isaiah Whitaker's arm. I said, you're staying right here. Isaiah looked at the young officer without anger. Son, the ceremony is about to begin. I don't care. I only need 30 seconds. You've already had enough attention. Several guests nearby had stopped pretending not to watch. Whispers drifted through the crowd. What's going on? Who is that elderly man? Did he try to sneak in? The television camera that had been covering the arrival of honored guests slowly turned toward the confrontation. Brandon noticed. Instead of backing down, his posture became even more aggressive. He wanted everyone to see him taking control. Isaiah glanced once more toward the polished black granite memorial. Thomas Monroe's name stood only a few yards away. 28 years. He had kept the same promise every single year. Not once had anyone stopped him. Until today, he took a slow breath. Officer, please. Let me place these lilies in front of Thomas Monroe's name. Brandon frowned. So now you know one of the names on the wall. I knew him very well. Brandon laughed loudly enough for dozens of people to hear. Sure you did. He looked around at the gathering crowd before saying with open contempt, funny how every year somebody suddenly claims they were best friends with a fallen officer. A few uncomfortable chuckles came from the back. Isaiah never responded. The silence only irritated Brandon more. He grabbed the bouquet from Isaiah's hand. The white lilies brushed against the polished granite before Brandon carelessly tossed them onto the ground. Several petals scattered across the memorial steps. A woman in the front row quietly gasped. Isaiah instinctively bent down to pick up the flowers. Before his fingers could touch them, Brandon shoved him hard. The 73-year-old man's balance disappeared instantly. His cane slid across the pavement. His shoulders slammed into the granite base of the memorial with a heavy thud. The wooden keepsake box slipped from beneath his arm. No, Isaiah whispered. The box struck the stone. Its brass latch snapped open. Everything inside exploded across the plaza. The old silver badge spun across the concrete before stopping near a television cameraman's shoe. A neatly folded American flag unfolded halfway as it slid through the dust. Several faded photographs scattered in different directions. One picture landed face up. Two smiling young police officers stood beside a patrol car, arms around each other's shoulders. Another photograph showed a little boy sitting on the shoulders of a uniformed officer. Nobody looked closely enough to understand. Not yet. The final item drifted slowly to the ground, a yellowed envelope tied with a faded blue ribbon. Across the front were 7 handwritten words. To my son, when the time is right. Isaiah's face turned pale. His breathing quickened. That letter had never touched the ground before, not once in 28 years. He reached toward it. Please. His voice trembled. Please don't step on that. Brandon looked at the envelope, then at Isaiah. Instead of handing it back, he planted the heel of his polished boot directly on top of it. The paper crumpled beneath the weight. You expect me to believe this old prop? Brandon sneered. You people will fake anything for sympathy. A stunned silence swept through the plaza. Even several officers nearby exchanged uneasy looks. Sergeant Denise Carter immediately stepped forward. Officer Cole. Her voice carried unmistakable authority. Take your foot off that envelope. Brandon barely glanced at her. Sergeant, this man is interfering with an official ceremony. I said move. He refuses to identify himself. Isaiah slowly lifted his eyes. I never refused. You've been questioning every instruction I've given. I only asked to honor a promise. Brandon rolled his eyes. Enough with the dramatic speeches. He bent down, picked up the faded badge between 2 fingers and as though it were worthless junk, and held it toward the crowd. Look what we've got. He smirked. Anybody can buy fake police memorabilia online. A murmur spread through the spectators. Some looked uncertain, others believed him. A local reporter quietly began speaking into her microphone. It appears security has stopped an unidentified elderly man attempting to approach the memorial. The incomplete story was already becoming tomorrow's headline. Isaiah's heart sank. Not because strangers misunderstood him, because Thomas deserved better than this. He slowly pushed himself back onto one knee despite the pain shooting through his shoulder. Carefully, almost reverently, he reached for the folded flag. Before he could lift it, Brandon kicked it several feet across the granite. The flag stopped near the engraved names of officers who had given their lives. Several people gasped audibly. One elderly widow covered her mouth with both hands. Denise Carter's face hardened. Officer Cole. Her voice was colder now. That flag does not belong on the ground. Brandon shrugged. Then maybe its owner shouldn't have brought it here. Denise ignored him. Instead, she knelt beside Isaiah. Sir. Her eyes fell on the weathered silver badge lying beside his hand. She froze. Something about the badge looked painfully familiar. Not just the design, a tiny scratch across the lower edge. An old academy engraving. A serial number beginning with CPD 14. Her memory raced backward nearly 30 years. She had seen that badge before, many times, but that couldn't be possible. Before she could ask Isaiah a single question, a deep voice echoed through the loudspeakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and welcome the newly appointed captain of the Charlotte Police Department. At that exact moment, the first Black Command SUV rolled into Memorial Plaza. Then another, and another. Police motorcycles surrounded the convoy. Every uniformed officer snapped to attention. Every conversation stopped. Brandon quickly straightened his dress uniform, convinced the arriving command staff would commend him for protecting the ceremony. He had no idea that within the next few seconds, His career and his understanding of honor would change forever. Inside the lead vehicle, Captain Elijah Monroe looked through the windshield toward the memorial. His expression was calm, until his eyes landed on an elderly black man kneeling on the granite beside scattered lilies, a folded American flag, and a wooden keepsake box he recognized instantly. The color drained from his face. Without waiting for anyone to open the car door, Elijah shoved it open himself and broke into a full sprint toward the crowd. Captain Elijah Monroe ignored every rule of ceremonial protocol. The honor guard had barely presented arms when he sprinted across Memorial Plaza, pushing through rows of officers and stunned spectators. "Captain!" Deputy Chief Raymond Pierce called after him. Elijah didn't slow down. His polished dress cap slipped from his head and rolled across the pavement unnoticed. His eyes remained fixed on only one person, Isaiah Whitaker. The elderly black man was still kneeling beside the scattered photographs, trying to smooth the crumpled envelope with trembling hands as if he could somehow erase what had just happened. Brandon Cole stepped forward, assuming the captain was rushing over because of the disturbance. "Captain, don't worry," Brandon said confidently. "I have the situation under control." Elijah never even looked at him. He dropped to one knee beside Isaiah. "Dad," his voice cracked. The single word echoed through the silent plaza. Isaiah slowly lifted his head. For the first time that morning, a faint smile appeared. "You shouldn't be running in those shoes, son," he said softly. Elijah wrapped both arms around the elderly man without hesitation. "I thought you weren't coming this year. I made a promise." "You always do." Television cameras zoomed in. Reporters stopped speaking. The crowd stood frozen, unable to understand what they were witnessing. Brandon's confident smile disappeared. "Dad?" The word escaped his lips almost involuntarily. Elijah carefully helped Isaiah to his feet before brushing dust from the old Navy suit with the tenderness of a devoted son. Then he picked up the scattered lilies one by one. No one moved. No one dared interrupt. Finally, Elijah retrieved the folded American flag from the granite, holding it respectfully against his chest. His jaw tightened. "Who touched this?" No one answered. His eyes shifted toward the crumpled envelope beneath Brandon's boot print, then toward the old silver badge lying on the pavement. His breathing became noticeably heavier. Very carefully, Elijah picked up the badge. He stared at the worn serial number. His fingers shook. "I know this badge." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I polished it every Sunday when I was little." The plaza remained completely silent. Brandon's face lost all color. He looked from the badge to Isaiah and back again. "Captain, I didn't know." Elijah slowly stood. "No, you didn't." His words carried no anger, only disappointment. He gently handed the badge back to Isaiah before turning toward the gathering crowd. "Does anyone here know who this man is?" Nobody answered. Several officers lowered their eyes. A reporter quietly switched off her microphone. The silence itself became an answer. Elijah looked across the memorial. Then maybe it's time someone told the truth. His gaze drifted toward the engraved name of Officer Thomas Monroe. The sight pulled him backward through nearly 3 decades of memories. 28 years earlier, rain hammered against the emergency room windows. 7-year-old Elijah sat alone on a hard plastic chair, his feet dangling several inches above the floor. He still wore the little baseball jersey his father had promised to wash after work. Instead, it was stained with dried blood. Doctors moved quickly through the hallway. Police officers whispered in small groups. No one wanted to look directly at the boy. A nurse finally knelt beside him. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." Elijah already understood. He simply asked one question. "Did Daddy save people?" The nurse nodded through tears. "Yes, he saved a lot of people." The little boy smiled weakly. "Daddy always keeps his promises." Hours later, after the funeral arrangements had begun, relatives quietly argued in another room. Some said Elijah should live with an aunt in another state. Others believed foster care would be better. No one agreed. No one asked Elijah what he wanted. Then the hospital doors opened. Isaiah Whitaker walked inside wearing a blood-stained police uniform. His left arm rested in a sling. Fresh bandages wrapped around his shoulder. The bullet intended for Thomas Monroe had struck Isaiah first. Even after surgery, he had insisted on leaving the hospital. He walked directly toward the little boy. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Elijah looked up. "Is Daddy coming home?" Isaiah knelt, despite the pain. "No." The boy lowered his head. "He told me to be brave." Isaiah's eyes filled. "He told me something too." "What?" Isaiah reached into his jacket and removed the folded letter now resting inside the weathered envelope. "He asked me to protect the most important person in his life." Elijah looked around. "Who?" Isaiah gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. You. The child burst into tears. Without saying another word, Isaiah pulled him into an embrace. From that night forward, neither of them ever truly faced the world alone again. Life afterward was never easy. Isaiah declined multiple promotions. Every transfer that required leaving Charlotte, every assignment that would keep him away from home. He worked overtime, night shifts, holiday patrols, anything necessary to keep food on the table and Elijah in good schools. The old pickup truck replaced newer cars. Vacations disappeared. New clothes could wait. Elijah's future could not. Whenever people praised Isaiah for his sacrifices, he always gave the same answer. I'm only keeping a promise. The boy eventually became a teenager, then a college graduate, then a police recruit. Every academy graduation photo showed Isaiah standing quietly in the back row, never front and center, never asking for recognition. Even after Elijah earned his badge, few people inside the department knew the truth. Isaiah insisted it stay that way. Your father earned your respect, he had once told Elijah. I only helped you get where he dreamed you'd be. Back in the present, Elijah looked at Isaiah with eyes full of gratitude. Everything he had become, every promotion, every medal, every command, had been built upon one elderly man's promise. And only now did the crowd begin to realize that the quiet old black man they had watched being humiliated was carrying a history far greater than anyone had imagined. But the most shocking part of Isaiah Whitaker's story had not yet been revealed. The silence over Memorial Plaza felt almost sacred. Captain Elijah Monroe stood beside Isaiah Whitaker, still holding the old folded American flag with both hands. Around them, hundreds of officers remained frozen, struggling to reconcile the quiet, elderly black man they had watched, being humiliated only moments earlier with the man their new captain had just embraced as his father. Officer Brandon Cole stared at the ground. His mouth opened once, then closed again. Nothing he could say seemed capable of repairing what had happened. Elijah slowly turned toward the audience. My name is on today's program because I'm taking command of this department, he began. But the man standing beside me is the reason I ever wore this uniform. His voice remained steady, though his eyes glistened. My biological father, Officer Thomas Monroe, died protecting this city. He paused. The man who raised me afterward never asked anyone to remember his sacrifice. Every camera in the plaza focused on Isaiah. The old man looked almost uncomfortable with the attention. He had spent nearly 3 decades avoiding exactly this moment. Deputy Chief Raymond Pierce stepped forward quietly. Captain, we never knew. Isaiah answered before Elijah could. That was intentional. Everyone looked at him. His voice was calm. When Thomas died, people already called him a hero. They didn't need another name. They needed to remember his. Sergeant Denise Carter lowered her head. Now she understood why the old silver badge had looked so familiar. She remembered Isaiah Whitaker. Years ago, he had been one of the most respected field supervisors in the department. Young officers requested assignments under him because he never demanded respect. He earned it. Then, almost overnight, he had declined every promotion offered to him. Many assumed he had lost his ambition. No one knew he had chosen something far more important. Elijah smiled faintly. When I was 8 years old, I asked him why he never became captain. Isaiah, I remember. You know what he told me? The crowd listened carefully. Elijah repeated the words exactly as he had heard them decades earlier. A title can wait. Raising a good man can't. Several officers quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Isaiah smiled awkwardly. I was hoping he'd forgotten that. I never forgot anything you taught me. Elijah's answer came instantly. The captain slowly walked toward the microphone that had been prepared for his official speech. He looked down at the pages, then folded them in half. This speech doesn't matter anymore. He placed it on the podium. What matters? He looked back toward Isaiah. Is the truth. Across the plaza, Lauren Mitchell, the television reporter who had earlier described Isaiah as an unidentified elderly man, slowly lowered her microphone. She removed the earpiece from one ear. For the first time in years, she ignored the producer speaking through it. The story had changed. So had she. Meanwhile, Brandon remained perfectly still. Pieces of the morning replayed inside his mind. The flowers, the shove, the boot on the envelope, the flag sliding across the granite. Each memory hit harder than the one before it. His breathing became shallow. He whispered to himself. What have I done? No one answered. A few feet away, Sergeant Denise Carter carefully knelt and began collecting the scattered photographs. She examined each one before handing it gently back to Isaiah. One photograph caught her attention. It showed a teenage Elijah wearing his Police Academy acceptance jacket. Isaiah stood behind him with one hand proudly resting on his shoulder. Neither of them was looking at the camera. Instead, both were laughing about something outside the frame. Denise smiled through tears. "This was your graduation day." Elijah nodded. "He refused to stand in the front." Isaiah shrugged. "It was your day. It should have been ours." Isaiah shook his head. "No, your father earned that picture." Elijah looked down. "You still say that?" "I'll always say that." Deputy Chief Pierce spoke quietly. "Mr. Whitaker." Isaiah interrupted gently. "It's Isaiah." "No, sir." Pierce straightened. "I think today you've earned far more respect than Isaiah." The old man smiled but said nothing. Suddenly, Chaplain Ernest Walker approached carrying the weathered envelope Brandon had stepped on. The blue ribbon had partially torn. One corner remained badly creased beneath the boot print. "I found this," the chaplain said softly. "I believe it belongs to you." Isaiah accepted it with extraordinary care. For several long seconds, he simply stared at the envelope. His fingers traced the handwritten words. "To my son, when the time is right." Elijah quietly noticed. "You still carried it. Every day. You never opened it?" Isaiah slowly shook his head. "It wasn't written for me. Did you ever think about reading it?" Isaiah laughed softly. "Every birthday. Every graduation, every Christmas, every time I worried I'd lose you." He looked down again. "But a promise only means something when nobody is watching." The words settled deeply into everyone listening. Brandon felt his stomach tight. He had spent his morning assuming character could be judged by clothing. Yet the greatest example of integrity he had ever seen was standing in front of him wearing a faded suit and scuffed shoes. Lauren Mitchell quietly turned her camera toward Brandon. She noticed the young officer's trembling hands. His confidence had completely vanished. The image would later become one of the most discussed photographs in Charlotte, a rookie officer forced to confront the weight of his own actions. But another truth remained hidden. Elijah glanced at the envelope one more time. "Dad." Isaiah looked at him. "I think today's finally the day." The elderly man's eyes widened slightly. For the first time since arriving at the memorial, genuine uncertainty crossed his face. "You've waited 28 years. Elijah nodded. "And I think Dad knew this moment would come." Isaiah looked toward the engraved name of Thomas Monroe. A gentle breeze lifted the corner of the American flag resting in Elijah's hands. Around them, hundreds of officers unconsciously stepped closer. No one spoke. No one moved. Every person in Memorial Plaza sensed that the fragile envelope Isaiah had protected for nearly 3 decades held a truth powerful enough to change every heart standing there. No one in Memorial Plaza dared breathe too loudly. Isaiah Whitaker continued holding the weathered envelope against his chest, while Captain Elijah Monroe stood beside him like a son determined never to let him stand alone again. Officer Brandon Cole remained several feet away. His perfectly pressed dress uniform suddenly felt unbearably heavy. For the first time since joining the Charlotte Police Department, he wished every camera in front of him would disappear. Instead, more cameras arrived. News vans lined the street outside the plaza. Live helicopters hovered overhead. Within minutes, clips of Brandon shoving the elderly black man had spread across social media. The first headlines appeared. "Officer pushes elderly man at fallen officer's memorial." Another followed. "New captain calls humiliated black man dad." Reporters began receiving thousands of comments every minute. People wanted answers. Inside the plaza, however, Brandon still believed there might be a way to explain himself. He swallowed hard before stepping forward. "Captain." Elijah slowly turned toward him. Brandon removed his service cap. I made a mistake." The captain's expression remained unreadable. "A mistake?" "Yes, sir. I thought he was trespassing." Elijah looked directly into Brandon's eyes. "So you believed an elderly black man was trespassing?" Brandon nodded weakly. "I was trying to protect the ceremony." Elijah's voice remained calm. "No. You were protecting your assumptions." The words struck harder than a shouted accusation. Every officer listening lowered their heads. Elijah continued. "You never asked his name. You never asked why he carried those flowers. You never asked why he was staring at one name on that wall." He paused. "You judged him before you spoke to him." Brandon could not answer. Everything the captain said was true. Deputy Chief Raymond Pierce stepped beside Elijah. "The Internal Affairs Commander has already arrived." Brandon slowly looked up. His face drained of color. "So soon?" Pierce answered quietly. "This isn't an ordinary complaint." He glanced toward the television cameras. The entire country just watched what happened. Two internal affairs investigators approached respectfully. Neither looked angry. Their professionalism somehow made the moment even more painful. One investigator spoke softly. "Officer Cole, your service weapon, please." Brandon hesitated only a second. Then he carefully removed his duty weapon. Next came his badge, his radio, his department identification. One by one, the symbols he had been so proud to wear disappeared into the investigator's evidence bag. Every officer standing nearby understood what that meant. Brandon was no longer representing the department. Not today. Perhaps not for a very long time. As the investigators escorted him toward the edge of the plaza, Brandon suddenly stopped. He turned back toward Isaiah. The elderly man had not once looked at him with hatred. Not once. That hurt more than anger ever could. Brandon slowly walked back, ignoring the cameras, ignoring everyone else. When he reached Isaiah, he lowered his head. "I'm sorry." Isaiah remained silent. "I was wrong." Still no answer. Tears filled Brandon's eyes. "I disgraced this badge." Isaiah finally spoke. "No." His gentle voice surprised everyone. "You disgraced yourself." Brandon closed his eyes. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. Isaiah continued. "A badge doesn't make a person honorable. A person makes the badge honorable." Silence settled once again. Many officers instinctively looked down at the badges pinned to their own uniforms. Isaiah's words seemed directed at every one of them. Sergeant Denise Carter quietly wiped away a tear. "I wish every recruit could hear that." Elijah nodded. "They will." He stepped toward the podium again. This ceremony was supposed to honor officers who sacrificed everything. He looked around the plaza. But sacrifice isn't remembered only through names carved into stone. He turned toward Isaiah. Sometimes sacrifice lives quietly. In old pickup trucks, in second jobs, in missed vacations, in patched suits, in fathers who never ask for recognition. Dozens of family members of fallen officers began crying openly. Many knew exactly what he meant. They had watched parents and spouses quietly rebuild broken families after unimaginable loss. Isaiah had simply done the same, only he had never told anyone. Lauren Mitchell slowly approached with her microphone lowered. "Captain," she spoke carefully, "I owe Mr. Whitaker an apology." Isaiah smiled kindly. "You don't owe me anything. I reported before I knew the facts. You reported what you saw. I should have looked longer." Isaiah nodded gently. "We all should." The simple sentence echoed far beyond the reporters standing nearby. It wasn't only directed at Lauren, it was directed at everyone who had watched an elderly black man in a faded suit and decided they already knew his story. Elijah reached into his pocket. He removed a small velvet box. Inside rested the gold captain's challenge coin presented to him only an hour earlier during his promotion ceremony. Without hesitation, he placed it into Isaiah's hand. "Dad." Isaiah immediately tried to give it back. "No, you earned this today." Elijah smiled through tears. "I earned it because of you." The crowd erupted into spontaneous applause. Not polite applause, not ceremonial applause, the kind born from genuine respect. It continued for nearly a full minute. When the applause finally faded, Elijah looked once more at the weathered envelope, the one his father had protected for 28 years. The boot print remained visible across one corner. Carefully, Isaiah traced the damaged paper with his thumb. "I promised Thomas I'd wait." He took a slow breath. "I've kept that promise." He turned toward Elijah. From this moment on, his voice trembled for the first time all day. "This belongs to you." He slowly extended the envelope. Elijah accepted it with both hands as though receiving the most precious treasure on earth. Across the front, the faded handwriting remained perfectly legible. "To my son, when the time is right." Every person in Memorial Plaza instinctively leaned forward. No one knew exactly what Officer Thomas Monroe had written nearly 3 decades earlier, but everyone understood that the words inside were about to reveal the final piece of a story that had remained hidden for 28 years. Captain Elijah Monroe held the weathered envelope as though it might crumble in his hands. The boot print across one corner was still visible. For 28 years, Isaiah Whitaker had protected it through every move, every promotion, every difficult season of life. It had survived rain, house fires nearby, countless memorial ceremonies, and decades of silence. Yet only minutes earlier, it had nearly been destroyed by a man who never bothered to ask its story. Isaiah nodded gently. "It's time." Elijah looked at the familiar handwriting on the front. "To my son, when the time is right." His throat tightened. "I don't know if I can." Isaiah rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You can. Your father believed you would." The entire plaza stood motionless. Even the television helicopters seemed quieter overhead. Chaplain Ernest Walker stepped away from the microphone, allowing complete silence to settle over the memorial. With trembling fingers, Elijah untied the faded blue ribbon. The knot came loose surprisingly easily, as though it had been waiting for this exact moment. He carefully unfolded the fragile paper. The ink had faded slightly, but every word remained readable. Elijah took a slow breath before beginning. "My son," his voice immediately broke. He paused. Isaiah quietly nodded. Elijah tried again. "My son, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't lucky enough to come home." A sob escaped somewhere among the families seated in the front row. Elijah continued reading. "I know you'll probably hear people call me a hero. I hope they're right. But I don't want you to spend your life chasing my shadow. I want you to become a better man than I ever had the chance to be." Elijah wiped his eyes. The words blurred for a moment before coming back into focus. Then he reached the next paragraph. "If there's one person you should always trust, it's Isaiah Whitaker." A ripple moved through the crowd. Thomas's letter continued. "He has already saved my life more times than I can count. If today becomes my last day, it won't be because Isaiah failed me. It will be because he refused to leave my side." Isaiah lowered his head. Memories flooded back with painful clarity. 28 years earlier. An abandoned warehouse. Gunfire echoing through broken windows. Thomas pinned behind a concrete pillar. Isaiah charging across open ground despite bullets striking around him. He had reached Thomas, dragged him behind cover, taken a bullet through his own shoulder. They almost made it. Almost. Thomas had smiled through blood. "You idiot. You came back." Isaiah had answered without hesitation. Partners don't leave each other. The ambulance had arrived minutes later. Isaiah survived. Thomas did not. Back in the present, Elijah struggled to continue. "If I don't survive, I have only one final request." He looked toward Isaiah before reading the next line. "Isaiah, please don't let my boy grow up believing he was abandoned. Teach him honesty. Teach him courage. Teach him to respect every person before judging them. And if one day he decides to wear this badge, tell him it belongs to the people, not to his pride." Complete silence filled the plaza. Officer Brandon Cole stood several yards away, tears running openly down his face. Every sentence felt like it had been written directly to him. Teach him to respect every person before judging them. The words echoed inside his mind. He had done exactly the opposite. Elijah continued. "My son, you'll probably spend years wishing I could watch you grow. I wish that too. But whenever you accomplish something good, don't look toward the sky looking for me. Look beside you. If Isaiah Whitaker is standing there, then you'll already have the best father I could ever choose for you." Elijah stopped reading. He couldn't continue. His shoulders shook. The paper trembled violently in his hands. Without thinking, Isaiah gently embraced him, just as he had in the hospital 28 years earlier, just as he had after every disappointment, every graduation, every promotion, every heartbreak. Elijah buried his face against Isaiah's shoulder. "I never knew." His voice cracked. "You never let me read it." Isaiah smiled sadly. "It wasn't my letter. It was your father's." And he said, "When the time is right." Elijah nodded through tears. He knew. Isaiah looked toward Thomas Monroe's name engraved in black granite. He always knew. Deputy Chief Raymond Pierce slowly removed his dress cap. One by one, every officer in the plaza did the same. No command had been given. No protocol required it. Respect alone moved them. Hundreds of police officers now stood bareheaded before the elderly black man many of them had ignored only minutes earlier. Lauren Mitchell quietly lowered her camera. She no longer wanted to capture the moment through a lens. She simply wanted to witness it. Sergeant Denise Carter stepped toward Isaiah. "Sir," she fought back tears. "No." She corrected herself. "Captain Whitaker." Isaiah smiled. "I retired as a sergeant." Denise gently shook her head. "I wasn't talking about rank. You've led this department longer than any of us realized." Applause slowly began again. This time it spread through the entire plaza. Families of fallen officers stood first, then patrol officers, detectives, command staff. Even the musicians of the police band rose to their feet. The standing ovation continued without anyone asking for it. Isaiah looked overwhelmed. He quietly whispered toward the engraved memorial. "I kept my promise, Thomas." A gentle breeze lifted the edge of the American flag resting beside the monument. For just a moment, Elijah could almost hear his father's familiar laughter carried across the plaza. But one final act of justice still remained. The entire city had witnessed Isaiah's humiliation. Now it would witness exactly how honor was restored. The applause lasted nearly 2 full minutes, not because anyone had been instructed to applaud, because no one could remain seated after learning the truth. Captain Elijah Monroe stood beside Isaiah Whitaker with one hand resting firmly on the old man's shoulder. The tears had begun to fade, replaced by something stronger, a quiet determination. He stepped toward the podium once more. This ceremony was created to honor officers who gave everything for people they would never meet. He looked across the sea of uniforms. Today, we discovered someone else who spent nearly 3 decades giving everything without asking anyone to remember his name. The plaza fell silent again. Elijah slowly turned toward Deputy Chief Raymond Pierce. "Sir, before this ceremony continues, I have one request." Pierce nodded immediately. "You have it. I want the truth entered into the official record." Without hesitation, Pierce signaled to the department's legal recorder. The woman carrying the official ceremony ledger hurried forward. Elijah spoke clearly enough for every microphone to capture his words. "Let today's record show that retired Sergeant Isaiah Whitaker accepted responsibility for raising the son of Officer Thomas Monroe after Officer Monroe was killed in the line of duty." He paused. "Let today's record also show that Sergeant Whitaker declined promotions, transferred opportunities, and personal recognition in order to fulfill a promise made to a dying partner." The recorder's pen stopped for only a second before continuing. History was literally being rewritten. Elijah continued, "And let today's record show that the Charlotte Police Department failed to recognize one of its own this morning." Every officer felt those words. No excuse, no attempt to soften the truth, only accountability. Deputy Chief Pierce slowly stepped beside the microphone. As acting chief until today's transition of command, he said, "I accept responsibility on behalf of this department." He turned toward Isaiah. "Mr. Whitaker." Isaiah smiled gently. "You don't owe me anything." Pierce shook his head. Respectfully, "We do." He removed the gold leadership pin from the front of his own dress uniform. It was one of the highest symbols of command inside the department. Walking toward Isaiah, he carefully pinned it onto the elderly man's jacket. "This pin has been worn by every chief and deputy chief of this department for more than 30 years. His voice grew emotional. "Today it belongs on the man who taught us what leadership actually looks like." The plaza erupted into applause once again. Isaiah immediately reached for the pin. "No, I can't accept this." Elijah gently stopped his hand. "Dad, you've spent 28 years giving everything back. For once, please let someone give something to you." Isaiah lowered his eyes. Slowly, he nodded. Nearby, internal affairs investigators approached the podium. The lead investigator addressed the crowd. "Effective immediately, Officer Brandon Cole has been placed on administrative suspension pending a full investigation into violations of department policy, conduct unbecoming an officer, and disrespect shown during an official memorial ceremony." No cheers followed, only silence. Justice, everyone realized, was never something to celebrate. It was something to uphold. Brandon stood alone near the edge of the plaza. His uniform no longer carried a badge. His duty belt was gone. He looked years older than he had that morning. After several moments, he quietly walked back toward Isaiah. Every television camera followed him. He stopped a few feet away. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." Isaiah looked at him kindly. "Probably not." Brandon nodded. "I judged you because of your age." Isaiah remained silent. "I judged you because you were a black man wearing an old suit." The words were painful to admit. "I never asked your name. I never asked why you came. I never treated you like a human being." His voice broke. "I'm ashamed." The plaza remained perfectly still. Isaiah studied the young officer for several long seconds. Finally, he spoke. "When I first became a police officer," Brandon slowly looked up. "My training officer told me something I've never forgotten." Isaiah smiled faintly. He said, "The easiest thing in this job is making an arrest. The hardest thing is seeing the humanity in someone you've already decided you understand." Brandon closed his eyes. "I failed." "You did." Isaiah's answer was honest. "But failure isn't the end." Brandon looked surprised. "The end comes when you refuse to learn from it." Those words settled over the entire plaza. Not only Brandon needed to hear them, every officer did. Every reporter did. Every person watching the live broadcast at home did. Mayor Caroline Grant slowly approached the podium carrying a velvet presentation case. She had quietly rewritten her own speech while the events unfolded. "Ladies and gentlemen," she opened the case. Inside rested the city's highest civilian honor, the Charlotte Medal of Public Service. The mayor smiled warmly at Isaiah. "This medal has traditionally been awarded for a single extraordinary act." She paused. "Today we award it for 28 years of extraordinary character." The crowd rose again. This time, even the police band members placed their instruments down and stood. The mayor carefully placed the medal around Isaiah's neck. Flashes from hundreds of cameras illuminated the plaza. Yet Isaiah's eyes remained fixed on only one place: Thomas Monroe's name. Nothing else mattered. Elijah quietly picked up the bouquet of white lilies that Brandon had thrown aside earlier. Several petals had been crushed. He gently removed the damaged ones before handing the bouquet back to Isaiah. "I think someone has been waiting long enough." Isaiah smiled. Together, father and son walked toward the black granite memorial. No officers blocked their path. Instead, two full rows of uniformed police slowly stepped aside, creating a corridor of honor. As Isaiah knelt carefully before Thomas Monroe's engraved name, every officer in the plaza raised a formal salute. No command was given. Respect required none. Isaiah placed the lilies beneath the memorial, then rested one weathered hand against the cold granite. "I kept my promise, partner." His voice was barely audible. "Our boy became a better man than either of us ever dreamed." Tears rolled silently down Elijah's face. Around them, hundreds of officers maintained their salute. No one noticed that the morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting a warm light across the memorial wall, as if, after 28 years, an old promise had finally found its peace. The memorial ceremony officially ended nearly an hour later. Yet no one seemed eager to leave. Families lingered around the black granite wall. Officers stood in quiet conversation. Reporters lowered their cameras, many realizing they had witnessed something far more important than the story they had expected to cover. Isaiah Whitaker remained beside Thomas Monroe's name. He gently traced the engraved letters with weathered fingertips before stepping back. "I'll see you next year, partner." His voice carried the same quiet promise he had made every year for nearly 3 decades. This time, however, he was no longer standing alone. Captain Elijah Monroe stood beside him, not as Charlotte's newest police captain, simply as a grateful son. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Sometimes, silence carried more meaning than words ever could. Finally, Elijah smiled. "You know," Isaiah looked at him, "when I was little, I thought every dad knew how to polish shoes, fix bicycles, cook pancakes, and tie a necktie before school." Isaiah chuckled. "I wasn't very good at the pancakes." Elijah laughed through lingering tears. "No, you burned most of them." Several officers nearby smiled. The heavy atmosphere that had covered the plaza all morning slowly gave way to something warmer. "Hope." Deputy Chief Raymond Pierce approached carrying a thin leather folder. "Isaiah." The old man turned. "I have one last piece of department business." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "I retired years ago." Pierce smiled. "Not this business." He opened the folder. Inside rested a formal resolution bearing the official seal of the Charlotte Police Department. "I'd like to read it." Isaiah nodded quietly. Pierce cleared his throat. "By unanimous recommendation of the command staff and with the full support of the city of Charlotte, retired Sergeant Isaiah Whitaker is hereby recognized as a lifetime guardian of the Charlotte Police Department." A murmur spread through the crowd. Pierce continued, "This distinction has never before been awarded. It will never again be awarded under the same circumstances." He looked directly at Isaiah. "You protected one of our own. You protected his family. You protected the honor of this badge. And without ever asking for recognition, you protected the soul of this department." For a long moment, Isaiah simply stared at the document. "I don't know what to say." Mayor Caroline Grant stepped beside him. "You don't have to. You've spent 28 years speaking through your actions." Applause once again echoed across Memorial Plaza. Not loud, not dramatic, just sincere. Nearby, Lauren Mitchell prepared her final live broadcast of the day. She looked directly into the camera. "This morning, we believed we were covering the appointment of Charlotte's newest police captain." She smiled softly. "Instead, we met the man who quietly shaped him. The greatest heroes are not always the people standing behind the podium. Sometimes they're the ones standing quietly in the crowd." Millions of viewers watched the broadcast that evening. The complete video showed everything. Officer Brandon Cole's insults, the shove, the scattered photographs, the captain's embrace, the letter, the apology. By sunrise the next morning, the story had spread across the country. Messages poured into the Charlotte Police Department from every state. Retired officers shared stories about forgotten partners. Children of fallen officers thanked Isaiah for reminding them that family is sometimes chosen through love instead of blood. Veterans mailed challenge coins. Schools requested copies of Thomas Monroe's letter to teach leadership and character. 1 week later, the Internal Affairs investigation officially concluded. Body camera footage, security recordings, and witness statements all confirmed exactly what had happened. Officer Brandon Cole accepted full responsibility. He made no excuses, no appeals, no attempts to shift blame. Several months later, after completing the department's disciplinary process, Brandon requested permission to meet Isaiah one final time. The meeting took place on a quiet afternoon at Isaiah's small brick house. No cameras, no reporters, no audience. Brandon stood on the front porch holding a simple, potted white lily. "I wasn't sure you'd see me." Isaiah opened the screen door. "I figured someday you'd come." Brandon lowered his head. "I wanted to return something." He held out the flower. "I can't erase what I did, but I promise the officer I become from this day forward won't be the man who stood at that memorial." Isaiah looked at him for several seconds. Then he smiled. "That's all any father hopes for." Brandon looked surprised. "You still call me son?" Isaiah nodded. "A good officer enforces the law. A great officer never stops growing." Brandon's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." He quietly walked away. Isaiah watched until he disappeared down the sidewalk. Elijah, who had witnessed the conversation from the porch, smiled. "You forgave him." Isaiah folded his hand. "I forgave him the moment he accepted responsibility. Holding on to anger never honors the people we've lost." A year later, Memorial Plaza looked different. Near the entrance stood a new bronze plaque. Visitors paused to read its inscription. Sergeant Isaiah Whitaker, a guardian not only of the law but of a promise. He proved that true honor is measured not by rank, recognition, or applause, but by the lives we quietly lift when no one is watching. Every new police recruit stopped there before entering the academy. Every class heard the same story. Not about a captain, not about a ceremony, not even about a public act of humiliation. They learned about an elderly black man who never let bitterness replace dignity. A father who kept one promise for 28 years. A partner who never abandoned his friend. And a servant whose greatest achievement was raising another man's son to become a better officer than either generation before him. As the sun set over Charlotte that evening, Isaiah and Elijah placed fresh white lilies beneath Thomas Monroe's name once again. No television cameras remained. No applause followed. Only 3 quiet words drifted into the evening breeze. "We're home, Dad." The breeze rustled the American flags surrounding the memorial. Some promises end. The greatest ones become legacies. True greatness is rarely found in titles, uniforms, or public recognition. It lives in the promises we keep, the people we lift, and the integrity we choose when no one is watching. If Isaiah Whitaker's story touched your heart, share where you're watching from and tell us what part moved you the most. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us why dignity, compassion, and honor will always matter.